Good morning. I'm Dan Krasner, Executive Director of Integrity Florida. I'm joined by Slade O'Brien, the Director of Americans for Prosperity Florida. Americans for Prosperity Florida commissioned the report that Integrity Florida is releasing today. Integrity Florida is a nonpartisan, nonprofit research institute and government watchdog. Our vision is government in Florida that's the most open, ethical, accountable, and responsive in the world. Today's report, titled Enterprise Florida, Economic Development or Corporate Welfare. That's an important question this week as lawmakers in Tallahassee are considering whether the use of economic development incentives should continue or not. There are a number of House and Senate committee hearings on this issue this week. A number of lawmakers from both parties have introduced legislation related to this issue, looking at the level of transparency and accountability of Enterprise Florida, the government-run nonprofit that is the official economic development organization of the state of Florida. Enterprise Florida has more than 85% of its funding from government, less than 15% from private sector for its operations. They have committed over the years, signed contracts and agreements totaling as much as $1.7 billion for subsidies to provide to private companies in the name of job creation. Not all of those deals have gone through. In fact, presently, Enterprise Florida is reporting that since Enterprise Florida was created in 1992, there have just been 103,544 jobs that they're claiming credit for. In 1992, the Florida legislature set a goal for Enterprise Florida of creating 200,000 high-paying jobs by the year 2005. So after 1,600 transactions and committing, pulling taxpayer resources away from other projects and other needs of the state, tying up to $1.7 billion over the years. They haven't spent it all, but they've certainly tied it up and made choices. We've only seen 103,544 jobs created since 1992. The private sector support for this public-private partnership was supposed to be 50-50. Enterprise Florida has never achieved that we've found in our research that goal set by the legislature. At present, there's less than 15% operational funding of Enterprise Florida by the private sector. We're concerned about the appearance of pay-to-play at Enterprise Florida. This organization is subject to the domain and control of the Florida legislature and the people of Florida. Enterprise Florida collects on average $50,000 from nearly half of its board members who are companies that are contributing for a seat on the board, and there's nothing wrong with that. Where we see the appearance of pay-to-play is that a number of these board member companies have received incentive deals and vendor contracts from this board over the years. The Enterprise Florida private sector contributors also pay for the bonus pool of the Enterprise Florida staff. That was nearly $500,000 in this past year. And we see an apparent conflict of interest that you have the funders of the bonuses for the staff being the same. The funders of the staff bonuses are companies that are receiving vendor contracts and incentive deals negotiated by the staff of Enterprise Florida. And finally, we're concerned just in general about the concept, and I think Floridians are as well, the concept of government picking winners and losers in the marketplace. You know, is this the best economic development and job strategy for Florida to have our government favor some companies versus their competitors? So there are a number of questions to be answered this week by Enterprise Florida as they present before the House and the Senate. We look forward to their answers to the questions raised in our report. Enterprise Florida has been around a long time, since 1992, created under Governor Childs. This is an organization that is long overdue for a close look by the Florida legislature. It's been 20 years. It's time that we see if we're getting what Enterprise Florida promised. Let's see if the jobs are really here or not. It's time for some independent outside audits and views of this organization that I believe legislative leaders are taking a look at. How do we actually measure and account for this organization and the public's money? The companies involved here in this report are good companies. The people involved in Enterprise Florida are good people. Our concern is that the people of Florida see the appropriate level of transparency and accountability of where their money is going, what jobs have been promised, and what jobs have been delivered by an agency that clearly in this report has not achieved its legislative objectives. Slade, would you like to make any remarks?
Thank you. You know, first off, I want to thank Dan and Integrity Florida. We look forward to this partnership. You know, anybody that brings more accountability and transparency to Tallahassee is an ally of Americans for Prosperity. Americans for Prosperity is a nonprofit organization. We have over 2 million activists around the country, over 145,000 activists in the state of Florida. You know, I want to echo what Dan said. While this report is somewhat scathing, I don't want to point the finger at corporate citizens in Florida. Corporate citizens in Florida are doing what corporate citizens do. If you can get a comparative advantage, if you can get a competitive advantage, you're going to take advantage of it. What's wrong here is the policy that's in place, and that's what needs to be fundamentally changed. You know, we've been at this with Enterprise Florida for almost 25 years now. This report basically shows that they haven't lived up to the mission that they were tasked to do. It's time that this legislature take a hard look at what that mission is, and I think it's time that the legislature and the governor take a hard look at how we do economic development, period. You know, too often we create winners and losers in the marketplace, or we take a company or an industry and provide them special favors and make them different than everybody else in the marketplace. We came out with a plan last summer called 5 for Florida that would fundamentally change the way we do things in this state. Take the corporate income tax to 0. That way we don't have to worry about corporate tax credits when we're competing with other states. Let's eliminate the barriers to entry that exist in the state of Florida. Let's look seriously at regulation and get rid of regulation that keeps companies from coming here or wanting to grow here, whether they're big businesses or small businesses. I think the fundamental challenge that we have to ask ourselves, and that I hope the legislature will ask itself, is the goal here to compete with Texas and North Carolina and Georgia, or is the goal here to compete with Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Singapore? If we start competing with Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Singapore, we're talking about being the free market, free enterprise center of the Western Hemisphere. That should be what our goal is, and we should have policies in place that level the playing field for everybody, that make everybody feel welcome, and that are attractive to CEOs, job creators, and innovators around the world, where Florida will become first of mind when they're going to open up a manufacturing plant, start a new business, or grow a business. With that, we'll take any questions you have. I don't know why it would be controversial. Do you want to be more specific? I mean, we're both organizations that care tremendously about transparency and accountability and having government serve the people, not the special interest. So, I mean, we asked them to do the report. They did all the research on the report, and then we talked about the content afterwards. But I think that I mean, you can speak to that. I think you're very comfortable with the final product.
You might recall in April 2012, Integrity Florida produced a similar report on Enterprise Florida, raising similar questions. That report did not have a sponsor at the time. Our board would like to see us generate revenue for the organization and find sponsors where there's an opportunity for partnership and common ground. We've gone out and done that with the Leroy Collins Institute at Florida State. All of our donors are listed on our website, something that you don't see much of in this town, that level of disclosure and transparency. We're telling you up front and in the sunshine, this is the partnership, this is who commissioned the report, this is the group who did the report. I'd encourage you to ask every other research group in this state and in this country, when they put out a report, who's actually funding it. But we're grateful for the partnership and happy to disclose all of our donors. That's our policy.
You know, one thing I'll add to that, too, is, you know, this governor and this legislature didn't create these policies, but this governor and this legislature can correct these policies. And that's the point of this partnership, is we wanted to call attention to how we go about economic development. We don't think it's the right way to do it. We don't think it brings the most jobs to this state, that it creates the type of growth that we need. We need to rethink that. And the comments that I've seen, at least from the Speaker's office and from the Senate President's office, is that they're very willing to look at strong reforms this legislative session. You know, not all of them are issues that AFP works on, but I'm pretty pleased that we may have a very solid reform agenda across the board in Tallahassee this session, and I think that bodes very well for the state of Florida. I want to make sure that economic development is part of that discussion.
Dan, can you speak to the focus on enterprise Florida? You mentioned the first report was on enterprise Florida, here's another report.
Yeah.
Why are you sort of going after them? Is there a lot there? What's going on?
The issue for the people of Florida is jobs. We have too many people in this state out of work, wanting a job, and we have a state organization funded by the taxpayers' money that has told us that they are creating jobs for Floridians. They haven't delivered on their goals. From our research on this report and the report we did last year, Enterprise Florida has been one of the most secretive, self-dealing parts of state government, and it's time to increase the level of transparency and accountability for that organization. We're grateful to see bipartisan support in the legislature, lawmakers of both parties filing reform bills to finally hold Enterprise Florida accountable.
Are you seeing any movement? What sort of successes can you claim since April, since the first report came out?
Well, Enterprise Florida, to their credit, has made some gains, some steps to becoming more transparent and accountable. It used to be that their board of directors meetings were not attended very much by the public. We didn't see much in the way of video capturing those discussions. My wife Nicole and I and Ben Wilcox, co-author of this report, we travel around and capture Enterprise Florida board meetings on video and post those videos on YouTube for the public to see. But now Enterprise Florida is having the Florida Channel cover their board meetings, and that's a great step towards opening up those Enterprise Florida discussions to the public. We asked them in the spring of 2012 to begin posting their meeting agendas online and the minutes of their meetings online for the public to see. They've begun a process. Enterprise Florida claims about 7 days before every board meeting that their process is to disclose the agenda for the current meeting, which also includes minutes from the previous meeting. Unfortunately, they take that document off the web after the meeting. So there's not an ongoing collection of records for the public to follow what this important organization is doing with the people's money. So there's been some steps. Also, Secretary Swope has pledged that by March of this year, there'll be more transparency and disclosure of all the incentive deals since the start of Enterprise Florida. And we applaud that direction. If it's a true accounting of the companies who received money, how much were they given, how many jobs were promised, and how many jobs were delivered, that would be an adequate level of disclosure of the public's money being spent by Enterprise Florida.
Hey, Dan. Grace Wolf has gone before Senate committee saying that, before he had gotten there, the tracking or the records of the incentive programs were abysmal.
Yeah.
Would you say that those records, that all that data, all information has just gone too far south, that we need to bring the legislature to kind of press the reset button? Or are you confident that Gray's going to come in and work with you guys and try and do what's best for taxpayer money?
Well, Secretary Swope and Jesse Panuccio at the Department of Economic Opportunity, we met with them again yesterday, and they've made commitments for more transparency and accountability, and we'll see what they do. Again, Enterprise Florida has been around long before this administration, long before these leaders. There has been a mess in the past, and we're starting to see some steps in the right direction, at least promises of steps in the right direction. But right now, today, an Excel spreadsheet could be posted online with a level of details on incentive deals that the public would need to see to determine what was spent and what was received. It took us, trying to work with Enterprise Florida, it took them 4 months to respond with the actual records we requested to just get a list of the vendors they did business with in the last fiscal year. And it turns out there are a number of companies that sit on the board of Enterprise Florida that are on that vendor list. And that might be okay too, but what was the process? Why does Enterprise Florida not use the state's official vendor procurement system, vendor bid system? There was a Tennessee firm that just received the branding contract for the state of Florida. They were the high bidder versus firms based here in Florida, and the process Enterprise Florida used was to post an RFP on a website and invite a handful of firms to compete. Why not use the state's official vendor bid system for every vendor contract of Enterprise Florida? And for that matter, any public-private partnership, any organization, Citizens Insurance, Visit Florida, any public-private partnership that's receiving its primary funding from the people of Florida ought to use the state government's official vendor bid system.
You know, it's, yeah, I just wanted to add to the PR program and that being taken out of state. It's mind-boggling to me that there's nobody at Enterprise Florida that raised their hand and said, wait a minute, we're supposed to be doing economic development in Florida and we're contracting out of state to brand Florida. I mean, that tells you how far they've sort of strayed from the mission, I think. That's a very telling sign to me.
Would you say that there needs to be some sort of an audit, external audit, some agency to come in and look at the numbers for Enterprise Florida, or?
The questions we'd recommend lawmakers ask this week at committee hearings are, should Enterprise Florida be held accountable for failing to deliver on its job creation promises? Does the legislature view the current use of tax and cash incentives as the appropriate way to encourage a strong business market, or are these tools being used just as corporate welfare? I mean, until there's an adequate level of transparency in this incentives database and we see how complete it is, it might be premature to determine that. We'll leave that to lawmakers to consider if they've seen enough of where the people's money is going, and if they haven't, then after the transparency website is launched, then perhaps the lawmakers may want to consider other outside audits or other accountability programs to hold Enterprise Florida accountable.
Dan, this pay-to-play acquisition information, how many of the vendors that receive contracts that are also board members, what was the percentage of that the total vendor payout in Enterprise Florida? Is that 90% or is that?
We'd be happy to provide the full vendor list that Enterprise Florida sent us. They only sent us the vendor names, so we don't have the actual amount of money for those vendor contracts. As we've attended Enterprise Florida board meetings, like the one in May in Jacksonville, where 3 Enterprise Florida board members received vendor contracts, the contract values were not disclosed to the board. The length of term of the contract was not disclosed. So we're not sure how much the board of directors of Enterprise Florida is being told about their fellow board members receiving vendor contracts and the value of those contracts, the length of those contracts.
You have 11 names on here, several of which are subsidiaries of the same company.
Right.
Is it a list of 100? Is it, how many vendors do they have?
I can get you the total count. It's a long list. I mean, they have, I think it went on for, we'll link to it on our website. I think it's about a dozen pages of vendors. They clearly have a lot of them. In June, Integrity Florida was asked by CFO Jeff Atwater to be part of the launch of the Florida Accountability Contracts Tracking System. And at that time, we stood up and asked CFO Atwater if he would challenge Enterprise Florida, along with Citizens Insurance and Visit Florida, to post all their vendor contracts online to his system and post all the spending of taxpayer money to the disclosure systems managed by the CFO. The CFO made that challenge. We applaud that challenge, but so far, Enterprise Florida has failed to deliver on disclosing its vendor contracts and its spending.
In your report, you note that last year the board of directors approved raises for the staff in Enterprise Florida of about $500,000, and for the CEO, a $17,000 raise. Is your recommendation that these vendor companies that are also receiving contracts should abstain from those types of votes, or what's your recommendation on that?
At the very least, abstaining from votes where there's a potential conflict would be a good policy. And in looking at the minutes of that meeting and the votes on the bonuses, I did not see any evidence in our research that took place. I mean, it seems like if a vendor doing business with the state of Florida had control over the bonus of the staff giving out that vendor contract, I would think the public would say there's a conflict there. So that policy should be looked at by the board of Enterprise Florida, by the staff, and by the Florida legislature if the board refuses to take action to improve that process.
And did in your discussions with Enterprise Florida, did they talk about the lack of private funding, how they haven't been able to reach the 50% threshold? They can talk about why that is.
In our meeting with the entire team of Enterprise Florida yesterday, we did not receive an answer to why that goal has not been met.
Is that in the statute, or is that just kind of a guideline for them?
We found that in an OPAGA report that we cite in the research report. Well, it's time that every penny of the public's money be looked at, and because choices are being made. The legislature's only mandate is to set a budget for the people of Florida. That budget obviously needs to be made more transparent, but there are choices to be made. The choice of Enterprise Florida using the tool of incentives is a choice, and there are other choices. There are other ways to grow the economy. And lawmakers need to understand the cost and benefit of utilizing incentives as a tool for economic development versus other strategies. There could be investments in infrastructure, in our environment and quality of life, in education and workforce development. There are plenty of other choices, plenty of other ways to help the people of Florida and to lift all boats, to help everyone grow jobs rather than just a handful of companies.
It kind of sounds like you're saying that maybe incentives just don't work.
There is growing evidence around the country that the subsidies being used by economic development organizations across the country may not work. That's an important question as the debate moves forward this legislative session is what evidence is there that these incentives work anywhere? That's an important question for the lawmakers to get their hands around. Are incentives the only way, the silver bullet for growing jobs? It's essentially, the way we see it, it's like a company saying the only way I'm going to sell my product is if I offer a rebate. I'm not sure that that's the only way you can sell a good product. We love this state. We're native Floridians. We're allowed to have other discussion and debate about how we grow our state's economy. And when we look at incentives as one tool, the idea of rebates to some companies and not their competitors, it's worth asking, is that the best way to do it? Can we do better? Can we do more broad-based, lift all boats things that helps this economy and helps grow jobs for the people of Florida?
Dan, do you believe, regardless of whether they're effective or not, the incentives seem to be the way the game is played at this point. Do you have any examples of other states that aren't doing the same thing that Enterprise Florida is doing as far as offering cash incentives or tax incentives and are doing other things that are being successful?
Well, one of the things that's interesting about the states is, each one of them is an individual state, so you're looking at 50 different incubators out there. But to my knowledge, there's no state in the country that has a 0% corporate income tax. And one of the ways that we play this game is by offering tax credits on different things for industries or companies to come to the state of Florida and to compete against each other. We get in bidding wars with other states for job creation or to keep jobs here. Again, that's why we go back to the principles we put out in our 5 Florida plan, and Abby's got those, and we'll be happy to distribute those. But from our standpoint, when you offer an incentive, you are giving a certain industry or a certain company, like I said before, most favored nation status, essentially. But you're doing it at the expense of everyone else. Everybody else in the marketplace doesn't get that same goodie. And we would much rather see the same rules apply to everybody and lower the rates and lower the regulations and make it much easier for everybody to come into this state and to treat them fairly, get their permits done in a quality time. That doesn't always mean the answer is yes, but no's an answer. But let's tell them no in a reasonable amount of time where they can't go to some other state and get their answers much faster and know whether they want to invest in this state or not.
Just add to that. Florida is the 21st largest global economy. As Slade said, we need to compete globally. Just because other states do something, if they like the idea of rebates or coupons or anything else to have sales and their economy grow, it doesn't mean we have to follow suit. Florida has the best the world has to offer. This is why we all live here. We have best quality of life. We have an increasingly improving education system. There are plenty of other attractors to the state of Florida. 19 million people are here, and not every one of them received an incentive. We're here because we love this state. There are other reasons why companies choose to run great businesses here, choose to relocate here, choose to expand here. The incentive concept is just one tool in a much broader toolkit of what grows jobs and the economy.
It's well-intended, but the unintended consequences of it, incentives are well-intended, but the unintended consequences of those incentives are actually sort of business and anti-growth, because you're focusing on a narrow group of people who are benefiting from this at the expense of everybody else. You know, to some extent, Enterprise Florida has become sort of a good old boys club. And that's not the way we should be doing business in the state. It doesn't send the right message to other people who may want to come here.
Senator Gardner this morning introduced a bill in the Congress committee, given some studies done. Have you seen that bill, and have you seen others, and have you had input on those bills, and what are you, first impression of what your reaction to what they've got in?
We haven't seen that bill yet, but we'll certainly take a look at it. We've been told that, you know, Senator Gardner has a reform bill related to economic development. Senator Sobel has one that's either out there or coming out there. And clearly, you know, the leadership of both chambers of the legislature is interested in this debate, wanting to find out if incentives work or not, wanting to get a full accounting for the people of Florida. So we applaud the leadership of Senate President Don Gates and Speaker Will Weatherford for taking on this tough issue. Because this is about the people of Florida's money, and it's about jobs, and it's about the future of our economy. We'll take a look at the range of reform bills out there. Representative Jose Javier Rodriguez in the House, Representative Mike Fasano. There's just been a flood of interest in this topic, and we applaud lawmakers of both parties for taking on the institution of Enterprise Florida and this tool of incentives to find out if they're working or not. I think our lawmakers of both parties are asking the right questions, and let's hope they get answers.
What about Governor Scott? He was here for a board meeting of Enterprise Florida last week. He basically praised what the organization is doing in his budget. He's looking to increase the amount of economic incentives. He seems to be in favor of what's going on and doesn't seem to think that we need changes. What are your thoughts on that?
We've heard the governor's comments, and you know, he's stated his position on the issue.